I'm between you and coffee, so I'll try and make this swift and pleasant. I've given you a nice picture of some local flowers to get going, and you'll notice a little daddy joke on the way. We'll get to the actual daddy joke in a minute. Are we all good? Yes. So the goals of this work that we've done are kind of fourfold. So very briefly, the idea here is that there's a problem at the moment in how icount works, or at least from our perspective there is. And our goals were to use the TCG mechanism, the new TCG plugin, to allow us to do a better implementation of icount, such that you could use icount in MTTCG. Now, as part of that, using it in MTTCG, you better forget about determinism, right? So this is not a replacement for icount mode as such, because icount mode right now is deterministic. So this is more about, okay, I'm accepting that I'm not going to be deterministic, but I'd really quite like to have a better way of measuring time across my various different processes. Okay, so that's the vague overall goal. Now, conveniently enough, my dear friend Alex here provided me with a couple of little tiny extensions to the TCG. One of which is this bizarre scoreboard handling thing, an invention all of his own, which I have to say is a bit bizarre, but it does work after a sort. And the other thing, which is kind of work in progress, there's a patch, I think there's a patch going upstream at the moment, or it's about to go upstream, or it's kind of in there or in the mix, which allows QEMU to request time of the plugin. Now that's kind of a big difference in all TCG APIs up till now, because this one actually could potentially affect, obviously, how TCG executes. So this is actually changing a bit of the state of the TCG insofar as it is setting the time from time to time. However, unfortunately, that's not all that we require, and where we've got to, at least in terms of the experiments we've done and the implementation we've built, we kind of need 3 other little tiny additions to the TCG plugin. Firstly, we need some mechanism by which we're going to stop and start CPUs. I'll explain why, but basically we want to keep things in synchronization. Secondly, in order to make use of that, we end up needing the big QEMU lock. Whether we could come up with a different API that didn't need the big QEMU lock may be to be discussed. However, as we stand today, we need the big QEMU lock to make the implementation that we have work. And then we also need this QEMU deadline timer, because we want to find out what the next event is going to be, and I'll explain why in a minute. But basically, we kind of want to know, when does QEMU think there is another event that it's going to need to process? There was originally a plan to have, I think, on the API that information directly. In the end, for the time being at least, we've just exposed this function in the API. Okay, so that's kind of our base point. Why is there a problem? Well, the problem is, today, if you have several CPUs, let's take 4 as an example, and you're expecting all of those 4 CPUs to execute in parallel, perhaps, and you've come along and you've kind of measured time, you expect as a CPU that you're going to see a certain amount of time and certain number of instructions are going to execute before you finally hit, I don't know, a timer event, for instance. And some of these awkward real-time operating systems kind of, unfortunately, rely on some of this behavior. So the issue is that if you're not very careful, you will serialize time across these. And the way in which icount currently works, because it is deterministic, does that serialization. It's lovely, it's deterministic, I'm very happy, but unfortunately it means that CPU 1 in this case has only seen 250 nanoseconds. I mean, it's a random number, right? It's only seen a small amount of time, small number of instructions compared to the number of instructions that it thought it really should have seen until this event occurs. Now, you can do a whole bunch of stuff, right? You can say, well, I'll delay those events, I will multiply time up, there's a whole bunch of ways around this. But if you want to kind of, quote unquote, be as reasonably accurate as possible in terms of measuring the number of cycles that various different CPUs are doing, it becomes really tricky. And you need a whole bunch of information to do it. So the purpose of the exercise is to change somewhat the way in which we measure icount. So the proposal, and it's not that we're in any way unique in this, there are plenty of other simulators that do something pretty similar to this. The proposal is, hey, why don't I just choose one of those CPUs and make it the king and make it the guy who determines what time is, and then base everything else upon that CPU's time. Seems reasonable. Any one of those CPUs could be chosen. We can work out how many instructions per second that CPU does, and we can use that to generate a time number, and that would be perfectly reasonable. That's fine up until the point where that CPU decides that it's going to go to sleep for whatever reason. So choose another CPU. Okay, that's fine until you get to the point where all of the CPUs are asleep. At that point, run away and go and use the wall clock or go and use whatever you want to use. So that's the plan, right? We're going to choose a CPU. We're going to allow it to be the kingpin, the person who determines the time. If for whatever reason that thing goes to sleep, we'll go and choose another one. If everybody goes to sleep, we will probably use wall clock. Come back to that in a minute. So far, so good. That's the plan. As people have pointed out, oh, by the way, good news, there's already in the TCG plugin a way to find out when you go to sleep and when you come back again from a WFI, for instance. So that's good. I've already got all of the pieces of the kit that I need. I can find out when I go to sleep. I can find out when everybody's asleep. All of those things are all there. As somebody has pointed out, and we will get to it, you need to work out what you do when you choose a new CPU. So basically, the rules are going to be, when you go to sleep, choose somebody else. When you resume, if there are no active CPUs at the moment, if there's nobody else who is the active CPU, you become the chosen one. Otherwise, act as normal, keep going as normal. But you do need to become the chosen one if everybody else was asleep. So that's kind of easy. We'll keep going. So overall, this is going to propose some sort of means. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is there's no reason why we couldn't do this in normal icount, right? You could still serialize everything, you could still do it the way we currently do it and make it all deterministic, but you could indeed actually choose just one CPU to measure time based on, and you could do that swapping. And if you did that, you would at least get a more accurate icount value. You wouldn't have to start playing silly games with time in order to make icount deterministic mode work. So that's kind of an interesting side effect of potentially doing this. However, just one little tiny note, when the CPU is resumed, what we want it to do is take the current time. In other words, when CPU 1 went to sleep, QEMU time moved forwards. When CPU 1 comes back awake again, we need it to know that it was the one that went to sleep, and that when it wakes up, it should adopt the time that is now present. It seems, sir, that you've been asleep for a quarter of an hour. Time is now this time, off you jolly well go. That's nice, but hold on to that thought, because that's a bit awkward. But apart from that, hey, we're done, right? We've got this lovely new mechanism. It's all glorious. So what else could we need to do? Well, there's one thing that you might really want to do. We're doing all of this work, and that's all fine and glorious, except that we're now simulating all of our 4 CPUs. We haven't in any way stopped any of the CPUs. We haven't synchronized between them. We've just worked out what time is. Realistically, if you kind of want something that's going to look a little bit more like real hardware, you probably should be looking to make sure that, hey, this CPU here, which is set to have a very, I don't know, low instructions per second count, seems to be executing way faster than that CPU over there. Or maybe this CPU over here is, I don't know, better implemented. You know, it's been run through the TCG helper, and it goes much faster than this other CPU over there, right? In those cases, what I want to do is I want to slow one CPU down and allow the other CPUs to execute so that they all kind of stay, roughly speaking, in time with each other, synchronized with each other, within some sort of boundaries, I guess. And in this case, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to have to stop one of those CPUs in order to allow the rest of the simulation to continue and restart it again when I want it to advance. And I'm going to have some sort of mechanism to do that, hence I want to be able to pause and resume a CPU, which isn't that hard. However, when I do that, when the CPU starts again, like I've decided, okay, this CPU, it's now, you know, the rest of the world has caught up, I've stopped it, now it's time to start it again, it better keep its same time. If I zoom its time forwards to the current or backwards, things are going to go horribly wrong and I'm not going to get synchronization. So now I have exactly 2 opposite conditions. Either when the CPU resumes, it should take the current QEMU time because the thing fell asleep, right? Or when the CPU resumes, it should take its current time. Ah, darn. Now I need a mechanism to record why I stopped the CPU. So in order to do that, ideally we still want to just use the same standard CPU pause, CPU resume mechanism that's already in QEMU. That thing, fortunately or unfortunately, uses the big QEMU lock. In order, you know, you are locked when you pause. What we need to do is record some variable somewhere which just says, hey, I'm pausing you because. And right now, the implementation we have done for that is to take the big QEMU lock, set a variable, and then call the pause or the resume. One could imagine a different API where you gave the pause and the resume some sort of reason, and therefore you wouldn't need the big QEMU lock. However, that's not the current API. Anyway, by doing that, we end up with a system where effectively you're either in paused, or you're running, or you're in what we're calling idle, because you're WFI, right? And have I done something wrong? No. Okay. He's paused. Resume. And basically you can flip between them, and if you're doing a WFI, then you end up going into the idle state or whatever, and so on and so forth. And if you're running and you get paused and blah, blah, blah. And obviously the kind of shaded out yellow is other parts of the system are using this same mechanism too, right? And we have to consider that they might pause a CPU. You might be running your debugger and you want to, you know, pause something. And we need to consider what will happen in those cases too. So that's why the diagram is a little bit more complicated than it otherwise would be. Okay, glorious. So now a few, 2-3 slides on exactly what we're doing to pause and resume, and exactly where we're considering QEMU time. So CPU 1 here has been the chosen one, lucky boy or girl. It's the one who's going to set QEMU time. And the other CPUs are expected to kind of be trailing somewhat behind. That's a decision we've made. Up for negotiation. if it stays as a plugin, then that's our choice, right? I mean, you can do your own plugin and you can make your own decisions about these things. But simplistic way of doing it for the time being, we're expecting the other CPUs to be somewhat behind. So we have CPU 2 and CPU 0 and 3, I don't know, doing those things. Okay, everybody is currently active. Now, if one of the CPUs accidentally goes ahead of the current active CPU, we pause it. And we do that once per quantum. And the quantum is measured using the famous scoreboard mechanism. I didn't explain what the scoreboard mechanism does. Perhaps I should. So basically, it's pretty simple. You know the way that the old icount mechanism counts the number of instructions in each translation block? Perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. If you don't, then I don't know. Anyway, so that's what it does. The scoreboard does exactly the same thing, only it puts a value in for each particular CPU. And when you get to a particular value, which you get to set globally, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when you get to that value, you get a callback. That's all it does. And from that callback, you get to choose, what do I do about it? And as I say, QEMU is going to come and ask the plugin for time, or at least you can elect to be the plugin that provides time. So QEMU is going to come and ask you, you get this scoreboard mechanism to make some sort of decision about what number you're going to give back. Okay, so in the case that I get a callback from one of the quantums for that particular CPU, number 3, and it says, hey, I seem to be ahead of the pack. All right, guy, you're stopped. I'll let the pack continue, and when we move forwards, or the other CPUs move forwards, we'll release this CPU. Okay. So that's okay. The other case is, well, what happens if, which one is this? So one of the CPUs, okay. Oh, right, okay. In this case, I was wrong. Okay, so in this case, CPU 3 has indeed gone idle, but the other one, CPU 2, is now trailing way behind. Like, it's more than a quantum behind CPU 1 in this case. In that case, you're going to have to stall as well the active CPU. So now the active CPU, unfortunately, you're effectively stopping time, right? You're basically saying, I better stop time because the second CPU is taking ages to catch up. Okay, allow it to catch up. Oops, did I go the wrong way? I don't know. Yeah, so it catches up, and finally we continue. Okay, so that's all glorious, and now this whole knighting of the chosen one is a bit traumatic. And there are a whole bunch of rules that we've chosen here to maintain. And yeah, she's going to chop his head off, right? I mean, I'd be scared. Anyway, so moving QEMU time forwards, that's kind of an okay thing. Moving QEMU time backwards, that's kind of not an okay thing. It tends to have bad consequences, and users kind of tend to go, what's going on here? So ideally, we try to keep time moving forwards. We also try to keep time moving forwards for all of the individual CPUs. So some of these quote-unquote rules come from the kind of notion that we want to just keep time ticking forwards. There's a kind of an exception to that, which is that when a CPU becomes the chosen one, at the moment, we are suggesting that it adopts instantly whatever you currently consider as QEMU time. I should possibly make a note here. There are several times, and there's about to be another time. So each CPU now, notionally, has its notion of time because you're counting its instructions. QEMU has its own notion of time. That's the thing that the QEMU plugin is going to return to QEMU. We're basing that notion on time on one of the CPUs. So you have, in your head, you have to have QEMU time, all of the CPU times, and in a minute, I'm going to introduce yet another time. But okay. So the issue is, okay, if one of the CPUs has now become the chosen one, and you're assuming that the chosen one is QEMU time, then that kind of implies that you're going to adopt the current QEMU time at that point. Now, there are a whole bunch of decisions that you could make there. You could just say, I'm going to move time forwards if it's behind. I'm going to, you know, there are a bunch of decisions that you could make. What we're currently doing is pretty naive and just saying, okay, you take the QEMU time as that current CPU's time. Other options are possible. And that option, by the way, does mean that for that CPU, potentially time just moved backwards. So what are we doing here? I've got a really sad story to tell, and it's a bit touching, unfortunately. So I'll interrupt the proceedings and make you all cry. I'm the second, what do you call it? There's the mayor in my town, and there's the deputy mayor, and I'm the sub-deputy mayor. There's only 350 of us in the town. Everybody takes their turn. The other day, I was actually out, and my wife was at home, and she said, the bells are ringing. And the church bell was just ringing constantly. And I came home, and the mayor was outside the church in a pretty awful state. And it turns out that a young man from the village who was 30, he was a plasterer. He was driving home Monday last, and he was probably driving way too fast, and he was probably reaching down for his phone that had probably dropped on the floor, and unfortunately, I guess you know the rest of the story. Luckily, it involved a tree and not another car coming in the opposite direction, but nonetheless, it's a pretty sad story. Guys, we can do something about this. We know we can do something about this, but my God, it's going to take a lot of simulation. This is about trying to save lives more than anything else, and I'm absolutely serious about that, right? So what my group is involved in right now is trying to help automotive customers particularly, building really quite large simulations of environments, including our Qualcomm system on chips, but also including a shed load of other stuff. And that's why we're interested in making sure that we're modeling time relatively well, but we need to model relatively lots of other things as well. So if I press the play button on this, you don't get to see Linux boot, I'm afraid, because I'm assuming that's happened. But this is our virtual system on chip, so it's our QEMU-based simulation environment, running alongside a thing called Kala. Kala is based on the Universal Gaming Engine, I think it's called, and it generates all your visual images, and it generates LiDAR data and blah, 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 right? And that gets plumbed into our simulation environment. Hey, there's probably a bit of cheating going on in the corners, but I'm not going to tell you too much about that. But this is basically the idea. It's plumbed into the simulation environment, and then the simulation environment is running, actually it's running Linux. And on top of Linux, it's running a small, Kala comes with a little agent that pretends to be an automatic drive agent. So the whole stack is kind of running together. So you've got Kala, you've got your virtual platform based on QEMU, and you've got on top of that Linux, and on top of that you've got a kind of an automatic drive type thing. Okay, you can imagine that there's an awful lot of OEMs out there running a hell of a lot of this stuff. And of course they are, and they have to run it in, I mean, Kala is a lovely open source example, but they mostly have closed source methods to do this, and they are typically really quite complicated, as you can imagine. So if I go to the next slide. So I mean, this is not real. This is kind of the goal. You have an awful lot of MATLAB, FMI, FMU out there. So people who are writing models of engines, of wheels, of brakes, of whatever it is, right? A lot of that. And indeed, a lot of the automatic drive software is being written in things like MATLAB and then generated and then run on the platform, right? So there is a whole software stack there too. And of course, that is time critical. Hence, we need this timing approach. So yeah, you have MATLAB models out there, you've got cameras, you've got LiDAR, you've got all sorts of other things. There's things like SILKit. I don't know who is, hands up, anybody's heard of SILKit? Yeah, okay, it's not the hugest number of people in the room, right? But SILKit is a massive open source, I mean it's a well used open source simulation framework. I don't particularly like it. I don't know whether you come from Vector, but it's not my favorite environment. But there are many others, by the way. SILKit is one example. I could list you 10. There are various other accelerators out there. There's System C that you possibly know that I use extensively. Edgar has presented at KVM Forum in the past on it. There's Carla. There's hundreds of others, right? QEMU, frankly, is a corner dot. It's an important corner dot, but it's just one element in a very larger environment of simulation. And if we want to save those people, we better start working with those other people as well. I should probably leave you with that horrible thought. So connecting things together is kind of what I'm about. Time synchronization is just one point in that. I'm aware that time is synchronizing against me, so I shall speak. Self-involved, then maybe we could solve the problem of kids killing themselves on the road somewhat quicker. That's my big ask. And yeah, the sooner we have, and it's not just time, unfortunately, it's also data transfer and connectivity and so on and so forth. But if we could have that API, as opposed to having to use the plugin API, and then by the way, TCG plugin, well, I want to use KVM. And I need the same time mechanisms for KVM as I use for TCG. And in fact, I don't really care that it's KVM or TCG. I just want to be able to say to QEMU at large, you know, here's your time window. So, yes, please. Anybody want to ask any other? I don't know who Robin is. In which case, enjoy your coffee.